Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roach Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. College basketball is right around the corner. In a few weeks, it will be returning to our television screens. But one thing that definitely signifies that it is right around the corner is with the return of the AP Top 25 poll. The preseason poll for college basketball is out, and I'm going to go over every single ranking and see if I agree or disagree with where the AP voters rank these teams in the preseason. Now, since it is the preseason and none of these teams have played yet, it is kind of hard for the AP voters to really guess where these teams should be ranked. So I'm definitely going to give the AP voters a grain of salt. Kansas is the number one team in college basketball in the preseason AP Top 25 poll, and I'm not actually surprised by that because Kansas has a lot of talent returning. None other than Kevin McCullough himself. He's back. He is an experienced basketball player and a great defender. Kansas has other returning players as well, like DeJuan Harris. And then you talk about a transfer class headlined by Hunter Dickinson. Kansas has talent all over the place, and they were so overloaded on the roster that they weren't able to get Mackenzie Mbako to add to all the talent that they already had. He went to Indiana. So Kansas, they have a full roster. They have tons of great players, and a lot of players had to transfer from Kansas because they have such a loaded roster. And you have Hall of Fame coach Bill Self going to be coaching those guys up. I think that Kansas, being the number one team for now, is absolutely fair. Duke's at number two. This one's a bit more shocking. Yes, they're a blue blood program just like Kansas, but you do have John Shire, who's only in his second season at the Duke Blue Devils. Kyle Filipowski's return is a big reason why the Duke Blue Devils are number two, I would think, in the minds of AP voters. And they have a great recruiting class as well. But still, the Duke Blue Devils, with a young coach that doesn't have a lot of experience, I would have thought they'd be a little bit lower, but I understand why they're number two. Purdue's number three. Matt Painter, one of the more experienced coaches in college basketball. He's got Zach Edey, the player of the year from last season, and they've got Fletcher Loyer, Braid Smith, and a lot of their other rotational players coming back. I know why Purdue's number three, but after they lost to Fairleigh Dickinson, you would have thought that the AP voters would have docked them a bit for that bad loss in the NCAA tournament last year. But still, Purdue, with Zach Edey and all the returning players, at number three, I get it, but I would have ranked them a bit lower as well. Michigan State's at number four, and you've got Tom Izzo, a Hall of Fame coach, and he's got all of his players returning, like Tyson Walker, AJ Hogarth. The only player that he does not have returning is Joey Hauser, but those other players are talented. They have Xavier Booker to headline their really good recruiting class. This ranking makes sense to me. Michigan State has the potential to be the best team in the Big Ten next season. One of the best teams Tom Izzo has had in a few seasons. Marquette's at number five. Shaka Smart's done a great job in the short time that he has been at Marquette, and the fact that Tyler Kolek is one of the best guards in college basketball. He's returning. The Golden Eagles did lose a couple players from last year's team, but I would not be surprised if Marquette ended up being the best team in the Big East next season. I think a top five ranking is justified. UConn's at number six. They're the defending national champions. Dan Hurley finally got the Huskies back on the national stage in a big way, winning their fifth national title this past basketball season. Donovan Klingman is a mountain of a man. He's returning. He's probably going to be a high draft pick in the 2024 NBA draft. Cam Spencer's a transfer from Rutgers, and UConn has a great recruiting class headlined by Stephon Castle. I think that UConn has a shot, like Marquette, to be the best team in the Big East, and there is an argument that they could be ranked ahead of Marquette. Houston's at number seven, and I think some people knocked them down a couple of spots from where they ended last year's season because they're joining the Big 12, and that's going to be extremely difficult for the Cougars. They've been in the American Conference for the last decade, and it's going to be a lot harder playing against Kansas and all those other great teams in the Big 12. But Kelvin Sampson's a stud coach. Jamal Shedd's back. He's a really good player. Yes, they did lose some quality players from last year's team, like Jarris Walker and Marcus Sasser, but they were able to bring in transfers LJ Cryer from Baylor and Damian Dunn from Temple. So I think that the Houston Cougars reloaded, and they do look like a top 10 team on paper. Creighton's at number 8. Greg McDermott's been one of the most solid coaches in college basketball, very consistent, and I think that the return of Ryan Kalkbrenner is huge for the Blue Jays. Yes, they did lose Ryan Nembhard and Arthur Kaluma to the transfer portal, but Trey Alexander's back as well, and they brought in a couple new players. Creighton is one of the best teams in the Big East, I would think, on paper for next season. Maybe you could say with the loss of Kaluma and Nembhard that they could have fallen out of the top 10, but Creighton was good last year, and I think they're going to be really good again this year. Tennessee's at number 9. Rick Barnes is a very good coach. but he's not had a lot of success in the NCAA tournament. He does have Dalton Eck, a transfer guard from Northern Colorado, and Santiago Vescovi's back. Tennessee should be good, but Zakai Ziegler's injured, and that might impact the ceiling for the Volunteers. And like I said, they always struggle down the stretch of the season. They usually start the season well, but I think that Tennessee could be ranked a bit lower. Florida Atlantic's at number 10, and they've got all 5 starters returning from last year's team, which in this transfer portal era is insane. You would have thought that a couple of those players would have jumped to Power 5 opportunities. Maybe even that Dusty May himself, the head coach for Florida Atlantic, would take a bigger job. He did not, and all of his team return to the Florida Atlantic Owls for another season. It's always hard to run it back, though. Look at North Carolina. After they went to the national championship game, they did not have the same success last season. But Florida Atlantic, if they play with the same tenacity that they did last year, then the Owls could end up being a top 10 team. Gonzaga's at number 11. Mark Few's been with the Bulldogs for so long. They've had so much success. And even though program great Drew Timme is gone, they are in the West Coast Conference, so there's not a lot of competition. They're going to win a lot of games, so they're going to be in the top 25. And he brought in transfers Graham Ike from Wyoming and Ryan Nimhard from Creighton. I think that the Gonzaga Bulldogs did just enough to replace the big hole that Drew Timme has left for the Bulldogs to be a top 15 team. Arizona's at number 12. Tommy Lloyd is a solid coach. That was Mark Few's assistant at Gonzaga for a long time, so he has that international flavor because he got a lot of those international players to Gonzaga, and he has had the same success at Arizona recruiting those players. I feel like Arizona will be one of the best teams in the Pac-12 next season, if not the best team in the Pac-12, especially with the question marks at USC. I think that Caleb Love's transfer is going to be make or break, though, for Arizona. If Caleb Love plays well, more like the 2021 version of North Carolina, Arizona definitely will be the best Pac-12 team, but if he plays poorly, then Arizona will have some struggles, but they're still probably a top 25 talented team on paper. Miami's at number 13. Jim Larinaga has turned the Hurricanes into a consistent ACC contender. Yes, you lose Isaiah Wall, but Nigel Pack is back, and Miami also brought in Florida State transfer Matthew Cleveland. I think that the Hurricanes have a case to win the ACC next year, but it's going to be tough with Duke and some of the other teams in the conference. But I do think that Miami will be a top 25 team in college basketball next season, even with the loss of Isaiah Wall. Arkansas is at number 14, and Eric Musselman, he's the transfer portal king because he is a guy that knows how to get in talent through the portal. L. Ellis headlines the portal additions for the Razorbacks. He's the transfer from Louisville, but they got a ton of other players. They also have Trevon Brazile returning, which is huge. I think that the Razorbacks could be the best team in the SEC, but it's all going to come down to how that transfer portal talent meshes together. Texas A&M's at number 15. This is probably a shock to some people, but Buzz Williams is quietly building up the Aggies. He's been getting more and more talent year by year, and they have most of their starters back from last year's team. If A&M's roster just improves a little bit from last season's team, then A&M's number 15 ranking definitely could be justified. Kentucky's at number 16, and it's all about the freshman talent that the Wildcats have. John Calipari brings in 5-star talent every year, and he's got a lot of quality players that could be one and done, like DJ Wagner and Aaron Bradshaw. If all those guys mesh together and this looks like a vintage Kentucky team, then the Wildcats could win the SEC and be a top 10 team. But with this transfer portal era and with a lot of guys returning for their 4th and 5th seasons of college basketball, it does make it harder on the Wildcats with so many freshmen to have a lot of success. San Diego State's at number 17. Brian Dutcher has been doing a great job with the Aztecs for years, and he did lose a couple of his players from last year's team. Unlike Florida Atlantic, who brought everybody back, Keyshawn Johnson, that's a big loss. He transferred to Arizona. So San Diego State might not be as good as they were last year, but with Brian Dutcher and the fact that they're in the Mountain West and they're able to rack up a lot of wins, I think there's a shot that the Aztecs could still stay in the top 25 for the majority of the season. Texas is at number 18. Rodney Terry has a lot of question marks with the Longhorns because he had a lot of Chris Beard's players last year. They're all gone. Can Texas still win games? He did bring in Cade Shedrick from Virginia and Max Amos from Oral Roberts through the portal, so that should help alleviate some of the losses Texas had, but it does, to me, look like the Longhorns are a step behind Houston and Kansas in the Big 12, but they still have a shot to be a solid team, but I wouldn't be surprised if Texas ended up falling out of the top 25 as well. North Carolina's at number 19. Hubert Davis, he brought in a lot of transfers for the Tar Heels. Harrison Ingram from Stanford, Cormac Ryan from Notre Dame, Paxton Wojcik from Brown, etc., etc. North Carolina did a good job through the portal because they lost some players from last year like Pete Nance and Caleb Love. They needed to get players, and they also have Armando Bacot and RJ Davis returning. I feel like North Carolina is an enigma. They're a question mark all all over, I could see them not being ranked, and I could see them being a top 10 team if it all works out. But Hubert Davis, he's not on the hot seat, but a lot of fans are wanting wins this season for the Tar Heels. They're a blue blood program, and Hubert Davis is going to have to lead North Carolina to success this season if he wants to keep the fans happy. Baylor's at number 20, and Scott Drew has been a coach that has been so good for the Baylor Bears. Around 20 years ago when he was hired, the Bears were horrible, and they were under violations by the NCAA, but in the last few years, Baylor's been one of the best teams in the Big 12 and in college basketball, even winning a title, which was unthought of for the Baylor Bears. Scott Drew, he did lose LJ Cryer to Houston, which was a very tough loss, but he does have RJ Dennis coming in from Toledo to headline his transfer portal class, and Myro Little leads his recruiting class is really solid as well. I think that Baylor, like Texas, is below Houston and Kansas in the Big 12, but they do lead that second group of teams that look to be really solid in the conference next season. USC's at number 21, and I think that the Trojans have a shot to be the best team in the Pac-12 next season, and Andy Enfield has been a very consistent coach at the Trojans, bringing in a lot of talent, but all of this is going to come down to the health of Bronny James. He has been out after he unfortunately suffered cardiac arrest. If he can be able to hit the floor for the Trojans next season, in addition to Isaiah Collier and Boogie Ellis, then USC will have one of the best guard rotations in college basketball, and they will be very dangerous next season. But even without Bronny James at the start of the season, I feel like Isaiah Collier and Boogie Ellis is a good tandem, but I think that the ceiling for USC will be decided on whether they have Bronny James or not. Villanova's at 22, Kyle Neptune having to replace the legendary coach in Jay Wright. It's been a tough task for Neptune so far, but all is not lost for the Wildcats. They do have Justin Moore back off his injury. He looks to get back to his pre-injury form, and they were able to bring in transfer Hakeem Hart, and they also got some other players that are solid as well through the portal. I think that Villanova was a very injury-prone team last year, and even though they don't have Cam Whitmore, who's off to the NBA anymore, I do think that Villanova has a case to be one of the better teams in the Big East next season. St. Mary's is number 23. Randy Bennett keeps chugging along in the West Coast Conference, consistently having the Gales as the second best team behind Gonzaga in that league. Aiden Mahaney's back, and that's all I have to say for the Gales. Aiden Mahaney is an underrated player. He was a great freshman last season. He has NBA potential talent. He headlines a group of players that are all back for St. Mary's, a bunch of solid players, and I do think that St. Mary's will be the second best team in the conference yet again, and they should be a top 25 team for the majority of the season. Alabama's at 24, and Nate Oates, a lot of people have question marks on whether he's a top coach in college basketball or not. Brandon Miller's gone, and they did lose some other players as well in the portal, so it will be interesting to see how good Alabama will be next season. They do have Grant Nelson, the North Dakota State transfer, coming in, and they have a good recruiting class, so I think Alabama will be one of the better teams in the SEC, but Alabama is one of those teams that you could definitely see falling out of the AP Top 25 if all of this doesn't mesh together. Nate Oates has a lot of work to do, but the Crimson Tide have enough talent to be a top 25 team. Illinois is at number 25 to round out the AP Top 25 poll in the preseason for college basketball, and you could have put about 25 teams here. Illinois is a good team. Brad Underwood has built up the Fighting Illini from being one of the worst Big Ten teams to actually a middle of the pack to some years above average Big Ten team, and they do have Quincy Guerrier transferring in from Oregon, and they got Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins back, so Illinois has some talent, and they do have some returning pieces, which is probably why the AP voters put them at number 25, but they still have a lot of question marks because they struggled last season, and there are a lot of teams nipping at their heels that if they play better, I could see Illinois falling out of the top 25 really early in the season. And in the other receiving votes, these are a bunch of teams that could easily crack the AP Top 25 if they end up outperforming expectations for what AP voters have in the preseason. You've got Wisconsin, Colorado, UCLA, St. John's, which kind of shocked St. John's isn't ranked considering you got Rick Pitino and he brought in a bunch of transfers. Maybe there's just so many question marks for now. Maryland, Virginia, Auburn, TCU, Mississippi State, Kansas State, Xavier, Memphis, Missouri, Boise State, Indiana. Indiana is ranked a little bit lower than I was expecting in the preseason. They've got a lot of talent, but Mike Woodson has some work to do to replace some great players from last season, so we'll have to see where the Hoosiers end up. Florida, College of Charleston, New Mexico, and Drake. I could have went more in depth on the other receiving vote teams, but again, a lot of these teams are talented, just have a lot of question marks, and I could see all of them being ranked at some point this season. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about what the AP voters did in the AP Top 25 poll for the preseason in college basketball. I could see a lot of teams being ranked higher or lower. Again, try not to be too critical because you just do not know how good these teams are going to be till they play. But it will be interesting to see what happens in this college basketball season. It's always exciting when the season is about to start, and I'm sure that the AP Top 25 is going to change a million times before the season season is done. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.